In the Kresh vault beneath Krieg's ash-choked surface, a child lifts the bone tag press with practiced precision. The metal stamp descends with a soft thunk, imprinting another alphanumeric sequence into yellowed calcium carbonate. Around her, dozens of other children perform identical motions in perpetual twilight, their rebreathers providing the rhythmic wheeze that marks time in this buried world. Above their heads, ventilation grills weep grey powder like contaminated snow, each flake carrying the molecular memory of cities that died in atomic fire 5 centuries ago. The child does not cough. None of them do. Their masks, fitted before they could walk, have become extensions of their respiratory systems. Stamp. Breathe. Stack. Breathe. The bone tags accumulate in neat pyramids, each destined for a throat that has not yet drawn breath outside these vaults. This is not childhood. This is manufacturing. The Death Korps of Krieg represent something far more systematic than mere fanaticism. They are the product of institutional engineering on a planetary scale, a civilization that has transformed generational trauma into its primary export. What appears to be religious devotion reveals itself, under examination, as industrial process. What seems like heroic sacrifice functions as logistical certainty. The gas masks that define their appearance serve not merely as protection from environmental hazards, but as visible symbols of identity erasure, the standardization of human form into interchangeable military assets. Consider the mathematics of their existence. Every 180 days, transport vessels lift from Krieg's surface, carrying fresh regiments. The Departamento Munitorum records these shipments with the same bureaucratic precision applied to ammunition and rations. Casualty projections accompany each deployment, calculated not with grim uncertainty, but with actuarial confidence. The Death Korps die at predictable rates, in predictable patterns, for predictable objectives. This reliability has made them invaluable to Imperial strategists who prize logistical certainty above tactical innovation. The bone tag ceremony represents just one element in a comprehensive system of human conditioning. From the moment of consciousness, every individual on Krieg becomes a unit, a number destined for specific roles in the grand calculus of attrition warfare. The serialization culture pervades every aspect of existence, from ration allocation to the precise accounting of battlefield losses. Personal identity is systematically eroded, replaced by collective purpose. Ink is cheaper than memory here. Memory, like oxygen, is metered. Central to this engineered existence is the omnipresent rebreather mask. Worn from infancy, rarely removed, its metallic scent becomes a constant companion. The mask transcends mere life support in a toxic environment. It functions as sacred shroud, symbol of anonymity and collective identity. Its removal, even in the relative safety of subterranean vaults, constitutes profound taboo, reserved for specific rituals or disciplinary measures. This ritualistic adherence ensures that every soldier remains interchangeable, every death a calculable loss rather than individual tragedy. Even the language of loss on Krieg is codified, transformed into liturgy. Casualty reports, meticulously compiled and disseminated, function not merely as administrative documents, but as devotional texts. Children sleep to the sound of subtraction. Company designations, theater codes, variance percentages. Names are never spoken, only serials, and the pauses between numbers provide the only space where grief is permitted to breathe. Each report ends with standardized benediction, losses within acceptable parameters, mission objectives adjusted, stocks requisitioned. The liturgy serves dual functions: to honor as the institution defines honor, and to train children to hear depletion without panic. Food tastes like paper and metal. Water becomes a salted coin rolled over the tongue. Filters have their own rations, hours to a cartridge, cartridge to a day, days to a replacement cycle stamped into leather straps. On this world, the clock functions as instrument of faith. Breathing too freely constitutes impiety. Krieg presents itself to the wider Imperium as a cautionary tale refined into success story. The planet destroyed itself, then learned to harvest the wreckage. It raises regiments like other worlds raise crops, and the harvest proves faithful because it remains faceless. Administrators love the Corps for the same reason commanders trust them. They arrive, they obey, they attrit on schedule. The creed recited in vault and trench transforms guilt into logistics. Redemption is written in tonnage of shells fired, meters of ground taken, and most importantly, in men spent according to plan. Yet questions persist beneath this grim efficiency. What debt could justify building an entire civilization around dying correctly? Who writes the ledgers that determine how many lives must be spent? The ash continues to fall through ventilation grills, carrying whispered promises of answers, buried in Krieg's radioactive soil. The ash that sifts through those ventilation grills carries more than radioactive decay. Each particle holds the molecular signature of a verdict rendered in atomic fire, a world that chose annihilation over heresy. To understand why children now stamp bone tags in buried vaults, we must excavate the foundational catastrophe that transformed Krieg from prosperous hive world into penance factory. 5 centuries ago, Governor Hurricane severed transmissions to Segmentum Command and declared Krieg's independence from imperial rule. His proclamation cited excessive tithes and administratum corruption as justification for secession. Within hours, loyalist elements of the Planetary Defense Force had begun armed resistance under Colonel Jurten of the 83rd Krieg Infantry. What followed was not mere civil war, but systematic fratricide that would consume an entire civilization. The Loyalists faced impossible mathematics. Rebel forces controlled orbital platforms, primary manufacturing centers, and the majority of military assets. Standard doctrine demanded holding until reinforcement arrived. The Astra Militarum response fleet was projected 18 months distant. Colonel Jurten calculated his forces could survive perhaps 6. In a bunker beneath Hive Ferrograd, as rebel artillery reduced Loyalist positions to rubble, he opened sealed emergency protocols reserved for planetary extinction scenarios. The atomic stockpiles maintained for asteroid mining could be repurposed. If Krieg could not remain loyal, it would ensure no traitor profited from its betrayal. The decision made doctrine of despair. Missile silos buried beneath polar ice launched their payloads at predetermined coordinates. Industrial centers, spaceports, hive cities, agricultural zones all received their appointed doses of cleansing fire. The immolation lasted 72 hours. Skies burned until they went black. Oceans turned to radioactive broth. The rebels died screaming. The Loyalists died praying. The world died completely. When Imperial assessment fleets finally arrived, they found a planet transformed. The rebellion had been crushed not through superior tactics, but through systematic suicide. Krieg had chosen extinction over heresy, loyalty over survival. Yet from deep bunkers and sealed vaults emerged survivors, not victors, but orphans, inheritors of a world that had murdered itself for principle. They crawled into perpetual twilight, breathing filtered air through improvised masks, subsisting on stored rations and recycled water. The first Imperial representatives were Departamento Munitorum auditors, arriving 6 months after the atomic fires cooled. Their mission was assessment, salvageable assets, recoverable materiel, administrative value. What they discovered defied classification. The survivors had organized into functional work gangs, maintained equipment caches, continued manufacturing war materiel despite civilizational collapse. More significantly, they expressed no desire for evacuation. They requested assignment. They demanded purpose. They insisted their world's sacrifice required ongoing service to the Emperor, served by their annihilation. Ecclesiarchy representatives followed with the second assessment wave. Preachers found fertile ground among ash-dwellers, desperate for meaning beyond survival. The theological framework they established would define Krieg for millennia. The world had sinned by harboring traitors, been purged by righteous fire, now owed perpetual penance to the Golden Throne. Survival was not mercy, but obligation. Life was not gift, but debt instrument. The formal compact binding Krieg to eternal military service was signed in Ferrograd's ruins, witnessed by Munitorum officials and blessed by ecclesiarchy representatives. The surviving population, estimated at 47 million souls, pledged to raise regiments for imperial service until their world's guilt was fully expiated. The document established tithe quotas, recruitment protocols, and foundational doctrine shaping every subsequent generation. Buried within administrative appendices lay a classified memorandum titled Reconciliation Horizon Projections. This document, accessible only to senior departamento officials, contained actuarial calculations determining when Krieg's debt would be considered paid. Mathematical models examined population growth rates, recruitment quotas, casualty projections, strategic value assessments. The conclusion, expressed in precise bureaucratic language, was unambiguous. No terminus date could be calculated. The debt was designed to be perpetual. The transformation required more than administrative reorganization. It demanded systematic re-engineering of human psychology, conversion of survival guilt into productive asset. The Munitorum praised the planet's reliability, while ecclesiarchy sermons interpreted ration shortages and tithe surges as divine feedback. Between both institutions stood the mask, unchanged, not merely response to poisoned sky, but device-making, every face identical, every loss repeatable. From this ground, ash layered over ash, rises doctrine treating men as munitions without pretense otherwise. The child at the press in the creche vault is not accident of poverty, but policy incarnate. The disaster did not end, it was domesticated. Sin was curated into system. The system demands heirs. How does a planet transform generational trauma into military doctrine? What creed could make children accept suffocation as spiritual discipline? The answers lie buried in institutional machinery, converting guilt into regiments, shame into soldiers, memory into endless mathematics of acceptable loss. The institutional compact signed in Ferrograd's ruins required more than administrative reorganization. It demanded the systematic manufacture of souls conditioned for expenditure. From that foundational trauma emerged comprehensive doctrine, a catechism transforming survival guilt into military asset. The Death Korps ethos rests on three immutable pillars: absolute obedience, enforced anonymity, and death as the ultimate proof of loyalty to the Emperor. Each morning in the creche vaults begins with watchmaster inspections conducted with sacramental solemnity. Children stand in precise rows, while masked supervisors examine rebreather seals with the intimacy of confessors. Gloved fingers probe mask edges, test filter integrity, verify proper maintenance protocols. The inspection transcends safety procedure. It functions as catechetical drill teaching children to fear unmetered breath. A loose seal triggers communal punishment. A cracked filter means ration reduction for entire dormitory blocks. Personal failure becomes collective burden, ensuring peer enforcement of absolute compliance. The heresy litany follows inspection, recited in unison by voices made uniform through filtered air. The words, "Name Krieg's original sin," without naming the traitor who precipitated it. We harbored the faithless. We sheltered the corrupt. We permitted heresy to flourish in our midst. We failed the Emperor. We failed the Imperium. We failed ourselves. The litany continues for 17 minutes, timed precisely to match Governor Hurricane's initial transmission declaring independence. Children learn to recite these words before comprehending their meaning, embedding guilt into muscle memory through repetitive conditioning. Communal penances punctuate daily routine with mathematical precision. When equipment fails or quotas fall short, entire sections perform synchronized exercises, reinforcing collective responsibility. Push-ups in contaminated air until filters strain, standing at attention in unheated chambers until hypothermia threatens, marching in place while reciting serial numbers of the dead. These punishments serve dual functions: physical conditioning and psychological programming, dissolving individual identity into group accountability. The White Hand's Medici Order exemplifies how even mercy becomes militarized through institutional logic. Distinguished by pale surgical gloves, these medics receive specialized training in battlefield triage protocols, prioritizing service value over traditional medical ethics. Treatment depends not merely on injury severity, but projected remaining utility. Combat engineers receive priority over standard infantry. Specialists outrank conscripts. Veterans with irreplaceable experience supersede recruits with decades of potential service. The White Hands calculate human worth through institutional mathematics, their pale fingers determining who lives, who dies, and who suffers between. Artillery doctrine provides perhaps the most revealing example of military tactics becoming spiritual practice. The staircase of fire represents both prayer and bombardment pattern, memorized by children who will never see the weapons they describe. The recitation follows precise cadence, range calculations disguised as devotional verses, firing sequences embedded in liturgical response. Emperor's wrath ascending, shells at maximum elevation. Emperor's judgment descending, impact at grid reference 774. When Death Korps artillery crews execute this pattern in combat, they perform both military mission and religious ceremony. The mask serves as ultimate instrument of identity erasure. Fitted in infancy, worn constantly, removed only for specific rituals or disciplinary measures, It transforms individual faces into interchangeable components. Children learn recognition through posture and vocal patterns rather than facial features. The rebreather becomes sacred shroud, protecting not merely from environmental toxins, but from heretical notions that individual identity matters more than collective purpose. Serial numbers replace names in all contexts: personnel records, ration distribution, duty assignments, casualty reports, all reference alphanumeric codes rather than personal identifiers. Children learn their serial numbers before birth names, responding to numerical designation with reflexive obedience others reserve for family appellations. When death comes, the serial number transfers to the next occupant of that position. Identity becomes recyclable resource. Questions emerge from this systematic conditioning that challenge official narratives. A Scholam tutor, speaking off-record through filtered communication, describes irregularities in student populations. There are creches from which no child sees sunlight, where entire dormitory blocks share identical facial structure, identical growth patterns, identical behavioral responses to stimuli. Official explanations cite genetic bottlenecking from radiation exposure, but uniformity extends beyond natural selection parameters. This systematic dehumanization raises heretical questions few dare articulate. The mathematical precision of conditioning, the predictability of behavioral responses, the industrial efficiency of human production suggests manufacturing rather than mere training. Between munitorum quotas and ecclesiarchy benedictions, the system achieves equilibrium, converting guilt into regiments, shame into soldiers, memory into endless mathematics of acceptable loss. Are Death Korps soldiers born or assembled in industrial processes? The staircase of fire is both prayer and artillery pattern. What happens when prayers land? The heretical questions raised by systematic conditioning find their answers in the subterranean infrastructure beneath Krieg's ash-choked surface. What appears from orbit as a dead world conceals a vast industrial complex dedicated to human manufacturing. The creche vaults represent merely the visible terminus of production lines that extend through kilometers of reinforced tunnels, each facility calibrated to transform genetic material into military assets with methodical precision. The ethnographic tour begins where life itself is processed. Creche vaults stretch through cathedral-sized chambers, where thousands of infants lie in standardized cribs beneath artificial lumens that simulate a sun none will ever see. Technicians in grey robes move between rows with ritualistic efficiency, checking harnesses that condition tiny bodies to accept rebreather dependency. Each crib bears placards displaying batch identifiers, growth metrics, filtration hours logged, and deviation alerts. The walls function as ledgers, where every bed represents a line item in Imperial accounting. Names are numbers here. Numbers are lives measured in projected service value. Gene screening facilities occupy entire sublevels, their sterile corridors humming with analysis machinery operated by technicians in sealed suits. Genetic samples undergo sorting according to predetermined specifications that reduce human potential to alphanumeric codes stamped on specimen containers. Physical attributes, psychological predispositions, projected service lifespans, all evaluated through institutional mathematics. The screening eliminates variables that might compromise unit cohesion or predictable performance parameters. Children displaying excessive individuality, creative thinking, or emotional volatility disappear into alternative processing streams euphemistically labeled as remedial development programs. From screening, the paths diverge into specialized drill scholar, extending through kilometers of training chambers designed to simulate every conceivable combat environment. Here, children learn to march in perfect synchronization, their footsteps creating rhythmic percussion that echoes through ventilation systems. Education is entirely functional, stripped of any pursuit not directly relevant to future military roles. They master trench construction and field sanitation before understanding concepts like home or family. Physical conditioning proceeds according to mathematical formulas determining optimal strength-to-weight ratios for various occupational specialties. Instructors wearing ceremonial masks observe progress through one-way viewing ports, making notations in ledgers that will determine individual assignment to regiment types. Mask forgers operate in continuous shifts, their assembly lines producing thousands of rebreathers daily with the same ritualistic solemnity applied to sacred artifacts. Each mask receives individual serial numbers, cross-referenced to genetic profiles, and projected service requirements. Presses stamp steel plates into cheek curves and nose bridges, while servo-engravers etch anti-fog catechisms into lenses. Quality inspections are conducted with religious ceremony. Understanding these devices will define the wearer's entire existence. Workers treat manufacturing defects as spiritual failures, requiring penance and additional blessing ceremonies. Protein synthesis laboratories represent, perhaps, the most disturbing aspect of this underground economy. Vast vats produce nutritional compounds from recycled organic matter, their contents processed until all traces of origin disappear. The resulting rations taste uniformly of metals and preservatives, their bland consistency ensuring no individual develops preferences that might compromise unit discipline. Nutrition is calculated to maintain physical performance while preventing excess energy that could fuel independent thought. Water supplies receive mineral additives that leave metallic aftertastes, constant reminders of artificial environment and controlled existence. The tithe clock governs all production schedules with mathematical precision. Every 180 days, transport convoys must lift from surface installations, carrying fresh regiments to fulfill imperial quotas. This schedule drives every aspect of underground operations, from protein synthesis rates to mask production quotas to genetic screening throughput. Failure to meet tithe obligations risks exacta censure, administrative punishment that could result in planetary sanctions or forced compliance measures. The threat ensures perpetual output, a constant low-frequency hum of institutional dread driving the entire machinery. Quartermaster ledgers reveal the industrial logic underlying human production through classified documents that cross-reference projected casualty rates to equipment manifests. These records contain columns labeled expected wastage, positioned between LASPAC burn rate and bandage requisition, forecasting death with actuarial precision applied to ammunition expenditure. Combat theaters receive specific soldier allocations based on historical attrition patterns, environmental hazards, and mission duration estimates. When variance exceeds 3%, automated requisition orders spool to forges, creches, and drill scholar. The system treats human lives as consumable resources, calculating replacement schedules and inventory requirements with bureaucratic efficiency. Daily reality reflects this systematic dehumanization through continuous serialization from bone tag to body bag. Children move through processing stations according to predetermined schedules, their progress tracked through biometric scanning and behavioral assessment. Ration distribution depends on drill performance scores, creating competitive hierarchies that discourage solidarity while encouraging compliance. Most disturbing are funeral rehearsals conducted in specialized chambers, where children practice their own death rites, learning to recite final prayers while simulating fatal wounds and memorizing procedures for handling their own remains. The underground facilities demonstrate that Krieg doesn't merely raise soldiers through traditional recruitment and training. Instead, it manufactures human beings according to industrial specifications, producing interchangeable components for the Imperial military machine, with efficiency rivaling any manufactorum in the Imperium. Assembly lines process children from genetic screening to final deployment with minimal waste and maximum standardization. Quality control measures eliminate defective units before they consume additional resources. The entire system operates according to principles of industrial optimization rather than human development. Why does the quartermaster forecast deaths with actuarial precision? How do you spend a human life so that it balances an institutional ledger? The production lines beneath Krieg's surface terminate at the parapet. Everything the Kresh vaults manufacture, obedience, anonymity, predictable depletion, finds its ultimate expression when manufactured soldiers climb fire-stepped trenches and advance into wire. Death Korps siege doctrine represents the systematic conversion of institutional guilt into tactical methodology, where warfare transcends military necessity to become sacramental obligation. Their tactical philosophy centers on methodical earthworks that mirror the underground facilities of their birth. Trench networks extend across battlefields with geometric precision, each angle calculated to optimize killing zones while channeling enemy movement into predetermined corridors. These elaborate systems function as surface extensions of Krieg's subterranean existence, transforming landscapes into filing cabinets, where every traverse and communication trench receives alphanumeric designation. Wire obstacles stretch between positions in mathematical patterns, not merely to impede, but to funnel attackers into zones where the staircase of fire can descend with liturgical precision. Minefields receive deployment according to formulae determining optimal density per square meter. Patterned fields alternate anti-personnel and pressure-fused charges at fixed intervals, with safe lanes recorded in codebooks tied to unit serials. Sectors are lettered and crosshatched, allowing watchmasters to read ground like quartermasters read stock ledgers. The randomness is entirely artificial. Every explosive device occupies coordinates calculated to maximize both tactical effectiveness and spiritual significance. Artillery supremacy forms the doctrinal foundation underlying all operations. The staircase of fire, memorized as prayer in childhood, executes through stopwatch timing and catechetical precision. Creeping barrages advance in 30-meter steps at 1-minute intervals, unless wire thickness requires 90 seconds. High explosive cuts obstacles and craters earth. Shrapnel scours trenches. Smoke blinds counter battery spotters. When contamination permits, phosgene shells deliver atmospheric punishment, matching Krieg's perpetual toxicity. Forward observers speak in clipped vox bursts, their voices flattened by filters, offering corrections by quadrant rather than adjective. Prayer becomes indistinguishable from mathematics when shells impact target coordinates. Sapper detachments equipped with Hades breaching drills advance through subterranean approaches that extend beneath enemy fortifications, like arteries through diseased tissue. These specialized units operate with surgical precision, their adamantine teeth chewing through revetments and bunkers at steady meter-per-minute rates. Drill teams move like Medicae: cut, set charges, step back, detonate, advance. Where drills cannot penetrate, spades continue the work. Sap forward. Lift wire. Crawl. Wait for the next step in the staircase. The rhythm matches their filtered breathing. Grenadier storm tactics provide the final tactical element. These units advance through predetermined approach routes, while artillery lifts according to precise timing sequences. Each soldier carries explosive charges calculated to specific yield requirements, their assault patterns choreographed to achieve maximum penetration. Control operates through numerical precision rather than inspirational leadership. Assault waves receive calibration according to acceptable depletion rates calculated through historical analysis. First wave, 70% Grenadiers, 30% Rifle. Expected bracket, 35 to 45%, depending on soil composition and enemy caliber. The Assurance Edict codifies this mathematical approach to human expenditure. This classified campaign directive defines mission success, partly through casualty brackets serving as proof of zeal. Operations achieving objectives with losses below minimum thresholds face administrative review for insufficient commitment. Excessive casualties suggest tactical inefficiency. The edict establishes mathematical relationships between battlefield deaths and spiritual redemption, treating casualty rates as measurable indicators of devotional authenticity. Field Medici protocols reflect systematic prioritization of institutional needs over individual survival. Mask breaches in contaminated environments trigger immediate quarantine procedures, functioning as death sentences disguised as medical necessity. The White Hands apply triage protocols, prioritizing equipment preservation over human life. Understanding rebreathers represent more valuable assets than their wearers. A cracked lens, torn hose, or compromised seal receives adjudication without theatrics. The medic's gloved thumb traces a small ash cross on the patient's brow. Sometimes injection follows, sometimes reclassification to forward assault duty, expending remaining breath, achieving the next traverse. This theological framework transcends tactical considerations to become redemptive obligation. Each death represents payment toward planetary debt accumulated through harboring traitors. Battlefield casualties function as currency in transactions with divine justice, their suffering converted into spiritual assets through institutional accounting. The warfare is not merely brutal, it is devotional. Each shell burst tallying against an old sentence written in atomic fire. What kind of military edict counts losses as evidence of loyalty? If not commissars, who maintains discipline when soldiers actively seek death? The production lines terminate at the parapet, but the institutional machinery continues its work through mechanisms designed to manage soldiers who actively seek the very fate traditional discipline exists to prevent. Where other regiments require commissars to drive men forward with bolt pistol and threat, the Death Korps present an unprecedented paradox. Troops so systematically conditioned for martyrdom that the commissariat's primary function, becomes restraint rather than enforcement. Traditional commissarial methods prove not merely unnecessary, but counterproductive when applied to regiments manufactured for expenditure. Summary execution for cowardice becomes administrative impossibility when cowardice itself cannot manifest among soldiers conditioned from birth to interpret survival as potential spiritual failure. The bolt pistol remains holstered, not from mercy, but from irrelevance. Executions still occur, but their purpose shifts from disciplinary to technical. Mask seal failures, contamination breaches, or equipment negligence that compromises unit efficiency. The message transforms from "do not retreat" to "do not waste your death through incompetence." Compliance operates through mechanisms of collective responsibility that eliminate individual dissent before it manifests. When equipment quotas fall short or tactical deviations occur, entire sections participate in synchronized punishment drills conducted with ritualistic precision. Companies march in formation through contaminated zones until filters frost white with accumulated moisture. Platoons stand at attention in unheated chambers, while watchmasters count off numbers that release them only when collective penance balances individual failure. These exercises function as both physical conditioning and psychological programming, dissolving personal grievances into shared suffering that reinforces group accountability. Voluntary penance rosters fill with the enthusiasm other regiments reserve for leave rotations, assault pioneer duty, wire lifting details, forward reconnaissance in heavily shelled sectors, assignments that would require coercion elsewhere, draw over subscription among Death Korps units. Punishment companies maintain waiting lists. Men volunteer for misery before it is assigned, measuring personal worth through expendability quotients. The commissar discovers his hardest task is not forcing men forward, but holding them back long enough for institutional mathematics to align with tactical requirements. The Assurance Edict codifies this mathematical approach through campaign directives that define mission success, partly through casualty brackets serving as proof of devotional authenticity. In command dugouts chalked with humidity and dust, commissars review variance sheets comparing expected wastage to recorded losses. When a watchmaster requests permission for additional assaults to align with projected depletion rates, the commissar's denial stems not from mercy, but from adherence to barrage schedules and replacement cycles. The arithmetic must balance according to institutional requirements rather than tactical opportunity. This systematic predictability explains why the Departamento Munitorum prizes Death Korps regiments despite their tactical inflexibility. Bureaucratic efficiency supersedes battlefield innovation when institutional survival depends on reliable outcomes rather than optimal results. Quartermasters can calculate replacement schedules with actuarial precision. Strategic planners receive dependable data for campaign duration estimates. Most importantly, when operations fail, the Death Korps provide institutional cover through documented willingness to accept any losses deemed necessary by command authority. Predictable casualty curves simplify logistics, planning, and blame assignment across multiple administrative levels. Signal flare codes provide the technical framework binding doctrine to execution. These visual cues eliminate communication complexity while ensuring coordination between artillery batteries, assault units, and command elements operating through filtered audio systems. Green flares initiate crawling phases according to predetermined timing sequences. Amber signals indicate artillery adjustment requirements, their color penetrating gas mask lenses without interpretation difficulties. Red flares trigger final assault phases, where the staircase of fire lifts to permit grenadier advance through wire obstacles. Very pistols become both instruments and relics, their worn grips polished by generations of gloved hands. In darkness, the sky blooms with code that only the faithful can read, and the guns answer with measured thunder. All these doctrinal elements, systematic conditioning, mathematical tactics, predictable attrition, and bureaucratic utility, find their ultimate convergence in campaigns like Vrak's. This renegade Cardinal's Fortress world presents the perfect laboratory for Death Korps methodology, a siege requiring exactly their brand of systematic, attrition-based warfare conducted over years rather than months. The fortress demands methodical reduction through trench networks, artillery bombardment, and infantry assault conducted with liturgical precision. Every tactical element developed in underground drill skoloi will receive battlefield testing against fortifications designed to resist such methodical approaches. Before we descend into that convergence, we must understand what it means to exist within the system rather than observe it from administrative distance. The analytical framework reveals institutional logic and bureaucratic efficiency, but battlefield reality operates through individual experience, filtered through rebreather masks and processed through conditioning that began before conscious memory. When faith, mathematics, and artillery converge, what does it feel like inside the mask? Vrax, what did the Death Korps purchase, and at what unit cost per meter gained? The institutional machinery that manufactures souls in underground vaults finds its ultimate expression where doctrine meets landscape. Vrax represents more than strategic objective. It functions as the perfect laboratory for Death Korps methodology, a fortress world demanding exactly their brand of systematic, attrition-based warfare. Here, the mathematical precision learned in drill skolai translates into operational reality through logistical coordination, rivaling the underground manufactoria of Krieg itself. The build-up operates as industrial theater conducted on planetary scale. Transport convoys arrive at orbital stations with mathematical regularity. Their manifests cross-referencing ammunition tonnage to projected casualty brackets according to established consumption patterns. Macro haulers descend through ash-choked atmosphere, towing train lengths of flatbeds stacked with palletized shells, each crate bearing alphanumeric codes corresponding to specific phases in the siege plan. Rail spurs advance under cover of darkness, laying steel toward the front until the final ties rest within mortar range of enemy positions. Logistical chains stretch across 3-star systems to sustain the approaching campaign. Each Death Korps regiment receives allocation according to standardized patterns derived from historical analysis. Lasergun power packs calculated at 4,000 units per company per month, frag grenades allocated at 12 per trooper per assault phase, entrenching tools requisitioned at 1.7 replacements per soldier, accounting for breakage and burial with deceased. The arithmetic extends beyond equipment to encompass human resources, calculated with identical precision. Replacement schedules operating according to production cycles that began in Krieg's facilities years before the siege commenced. Artillery positioning follows geometric principles transforming landscape into targeting grid. Basilisk batteries occupy coordinates determined through cabalistic calculations, accounting for soil density, atmospheric pressure, and optimal firing angles for the staircase of fire pattern. Heavy batteries sight on reverse slopes to mask muzzle flash, while medium guns occupy timbered pits reinforced with salvaged concrete. Light artillery shifts forward by sling and manual labor after each lift of the barrage, their crews moving with synchronized precision of liturgical dancers loading shells that represent both destructive power and spiritual offerings. The creeping fire plan receives final verification through stopwatch drills, where artillery officers practice coordination sequences until muscle memory replaces conscious thought. Form 27V specifies 30-meter advances every 60 seconds under standard conditions, amended to 90 seconds over dense wire or heavily cratered ground. Forward observers pre-register targets through periscopes that smear with contaminated precipitation, their range cards marked with elevation data and deflection corrections. Green flares initiate crawling phases, amber signals indicate flanking service requirements, red flares trigger final assault coordination, where artillery lifts to permit grenadier advance through wire obstacles. Trench construction proceeds according to engineering specifications, mirroring Krieg's underground infrastructure. Parallel lines extend across the siege front at predetermined intervals, their depth and width calculated to optimize tactical effectiveness while facilitating casualty management. Communication trenches connect firing positions through geometric patterns, channeling movement while providing protection from counter-battery fire. Each traverse receives numerical designation, transforming the battlefield into filing system, where every position corresponds to quartermaster ledgers and medical evacuation protocols. Sapper detachments equipped with Hades breaching drills advance through subterranean approaches, extending beneath enemy fortifications like arteries through diseased tissue. These specialized units operate with surgical precision, their adamantine teeth chewing galleries through chalk at steady meter per minute rates recorded against airway tables and structural stress limits. Vent pipes rise behind the parapet like crude candles, exhaling warmed poison, while chambers are cut beneath enemy revetments and packed with charges individually weighed and signed for. Yield calculated to lift traversed walls rather than obliterate them. Casualty forecasting operates through actuarial models, treating human losses as predictable variables in mathematical equations. Medical officers review projection charts displaying expected wounded-to-killed ratios across different assault phases, their white hands medicae equipped with supplies calculated to specific consumption patterns. Wastage tables predict unit depletion per hour under bombardment, per minute once advancing over the parapet. First-wave grenadiers, expected losses 35 to 45% depending on soil composition. Sappers committed to breach operations, 52% if demolition charges fail, 18% if galleries remain intact. The Assurance Edict governs these calculations with administrative precision, defining mission success partly through casualty brackets serving as proof of devotional authenticity. Triage stations receive positioning according to anticipated patient flow rates, their pale-gloved operators preparing black paint pots for marking the terminally wounded. A smear of ash indicates return to duty. A dot designates evacuation if transport capacity permits. Across marks mask breach casualties to be comforted until the line can spend them where effectiveness demands. Death Rider squadrons assemble in screened hollows, with mounts hidden under tarred canvas, their horses breathing through fitted masks glossed with frost. Their tactical role reduces to single sentence in operational orders. When inner bastions engage the main assault, cavalry will skirt flooded approaches to sever communication trenches and throw reserves into disarray before being erased by revised tactical requirements. Each flanking arc receives charcoal designation on planning maps. Each curve carries calculated cost in mounted personnel. Vrax demands this convergence because its strategic requirements align precisely with Death Korps' doctrinal strengths. The renegade Cardinal's fortress cannot fall through rapid assault tactics against fortifications designed to resist quick penetration. Victory requires patient, systematic, mathematically precise approach, transforming institutional guilt into military effectiveness over extended duration. Every element developed in underground drill schole finds battlefield application against defenses demanding their specific combination of tactical patience and human expendability. The night before H-hour, the front breathes as one complicated organism. Filters click in synchronized rhythm. Sappers sleep with gloves on because fingers stick to steel in the cold. Watchmasters rehearse flare sequences until color and meaning fuse into reflexive response. In command dugouts, commissars review variance sheets comparing projected expenditure to available assets, and for brief moments the mathematics resembles absolution. It is not. It represents only another kind of schedule, another ledger requiring balance through systematic application of doctrine to landscape. How does doctrine translate to reality when the shells start falling? What does acceptable losses actually mean when the math meets flesh? Pre-dawn on the 8th day arrives not as light, but as tremor through frozen earth. The assembly trenches exhale collective breath through purged filters, a mechanical wheeze that marks time in this buried theater. White hands medici move between crouched figures with ash pots, marking foreheads with smears that darken against pale skin visible through mask lenses. Each mark represents triage pre-authorization, administrative blessing for expenditure according to projected casualty brackets. Behind the lines, the first charges ram home, and the staircase of fire wakes with measured thunder that seems to count the heartbeats it will stop. At 03:47 hours, shells leave their tubes in liturgical sequence. The barrage begins at maximum elevation, high explosive dragging contrails through stale cloud, as if writing names no one speaks. After 60 seconds precisely, guns shift down. The second step lands into forward wire belts. Earth shakes and slumps like wet lung tissue. The air fills with sharp mineral taste and iron-bitter propellant residue that even filters cannot entirely deny. Somewhere along the front, Watchmaster Hadrian 77 raises his very pistol. Green bleeds into low cloud at 03:52. The line uncoils. His section flattens against the parapet and slides over with economy of men who have rehearsed this descent 1,000 times in rooms lit by artificial suns. They belly crawl through frost-crusted sludge where shrapnel has shredded topsoil into paste of clay and rust. Wire stakes loom and pass overhead, the men moving between them like blind fish through reeds, pushing ahead satchel charges like pilgrim offerings. Filter drums turn breathing into metronome. Somewhere to the rear, A shell falls short, and the rhythm stutters, then regains tempo. 200 meters north, Sapper Team Delta 9 works through gallery approaches beneath enemy fortifications. Their Hades drill chews chalk at steady meter-per-minute rate, while ventilation pipes exhale warmed poison behind friendly lines. Trooper Voss 417 operates the drill head with movements mechanical from years of practice, counting lifts of the barrage by pressure, changes through tunnel roof. When the drill punches into the enemy revetment base, dust avalanches down his shoulders like ash from dead hearth. The timer clicks into motion with catechetical authority. Amber climbs and holds at 0359, bruised color telling the section to rise enough for crouch walking. The barrage steps onto second wire belt, ground heaving under its weight. Hadrian taps helmets with his trench club to maintain alignment while men move with artillery's forward pulse, closing distance with rhythm borrowed from the guns. A trooper catches sleeve on wire. The man behind lifts his arm free and pushes him forward without looking at his face. Satchel charges rest against intact web like offerings at altar. Fuses spit greenish sparks in sulphur fog. To the flank, Death Riders ghost along shallow swale under chem smoke curtain. Horses wear fitted masks, eyes glassy and rimed, lungs pumping through canvas cones. The patrol represents arithmetic problem on hooves. Arc here, cut there, sever communication trenches and run messengers into barrage's back edge. When smoke eddies, mounts flick ears and press forward into crosswind that smells of old blood and brick dust. Red streaks overhead at 0404, like arterial spray against dawn sky. Final phase, authorized. The section rises from crater positions as barrage lifts final 30 meters, spilling through ragged wound in the parapet, with grenades already cooking to shave fractions of time enemy might use to stand. The bunker embrasure spits heavy stubber fire, chipping lenses with glassy dust hail. A grenadier runs at the aperture with satchel, holds breath from reflex, tucks charge into darkness. It thumps, and bunker interior kicks like dying animal. Beneath the traversed wall, Voss's drill penetrates when counter-mining charges detonate above. Chalk dust fills tunnel. A slab shifts, and his arm shears against metal shard, limb hanging by glistening threads. He stares at the stump for measured inhalation, then recites his serial number in calm, made flat by mask. Team leader nods once and pushes past. Mission clock is louder than pain. White Hand's medic meets them at gallery mouth, eyes narrowed against dust. He examines wound, checks rank stripe and clock, touches brow with ash thumb, and moves on. The stretcher-bearers slip past toward breach where demolition specialist with broken legs still functions. Voss staggers back into shadow, cradling blood like contraband. Doctrine does not hate him. It merely has no place to put him now. The strong point falls at 0411 when Sapper charges lift bunker roof in calculated demolition. Inside, ritual murder proceeds by inches. Bayonet work is silent behind masks. Enemy coughs without filters. One tries pushing lungs back through ragged slit and fails. Grenadiers move like men counting shelves in storeroom until resistance collapses under systematic room-clearing procedures, learned in drill chambers beneath Krieg's surface. In command dugout, Vox operator receives casualty reports cross-referenced against assurance edict brackets. First wave, 38%. Sappers, 47%. His voice carries only statistical accuracy required by protocol. Commissar reviews variance sheets, notes compliance within parameters. Where bunker stood, crater marks ground gained through systematic expenditure. Logbook records, objective secured, men spent. In the command dugout, whose voice tallies zeal in statistical brackets, the white hands passed him. Why is abandonment considered mercy? The silence that follows artillery thunder carries different meaning than peace. At 04:27 hours, when the last shell settles into crater-scarred earth, institutional machinery awakens with mechanical precision that transforms battlefield into inventory ledger. Reclamation servitors emerge from concealed positions like scavengers bred for ceremony, their augmetic limbs clicking across corpse-strewn ground with methodical efficiency that reduces human remains to administrative data. Each body receives identical processing through optical scanners that pass bone tag serial numbers into data streams feeding directly to quartermaster terminals. The servitors work without pause, their mechanical breathing patterns contrasting sharply with labored wheeze of surviving soldiers, adjusting filters clogged with propellant residue. Personal effects undergo immediate incineration in portable furnaces that reduce letters, photographs, and small keepsakes to ash indistinguishable from perpetual fallout coating every surface. Nothing survives that might attach sentiment or individuality to the deceased. Only bone tags remain, final proof of expenditure, destined for quarterly reports filed with Departamento Munitorum. Administrative terminals in command dugouts receive automated updates as casualty data streams through encrypted Vox links. Each death triggers cascading adjustments across multiple systems. Ration requirements decrease by calculated amounts, replacement requisitions spool to transport coordinators. Equipment redistribution begins according to predetermined protocols. The mathematics operate with clockwork precision, treating human losses as predictable variables in equations that balance themselves through systematic accounting. Commissar Voldane reviews variance reports with satisfaction reserved for administrative accuracy rather than tactical achievement. First wave losses: 38% against projected 35 to 45% bracket. Sapper casualties: 47% within expected parameters. Death Rider losses: 23%, well below maximum threshold. The numbers align with forecasts prepared months earlier by actuarial specialists who calculated human expenditure with precision applied to ammunition consumption. His signature authorizes not heroism, but statistical compliance, validating projections that reduce soldiers to mathematical certainties. Here emerges the reframing revelation that exposes Death Korps methodology as something far more systematic than fanaticism. Their legendary devotion transcends cultural conditioning to become logistical engineering on institutional scale. Predictable casualty rates simplify imperial planning by eliminating variables that complicate other regiment deployments. Quartermaster Corps can calculate replacement schedules with actuarial precision. Strategic planners receive dependable data for campaign duration estimates. Supply chains operate according to consumption patterns that rarely deviate beyond acceptable margins. This systematic reliability transforms apparent weakness into bureaucratic strength. Where other regiments might achieve objectives with lower losses but unpredictable variance, Death Korps units provide mathematical certainty, enabling long-term planning across multiple administrative levels. Their willingness to accept predetermined casualty brackets eliminates arguments about acceptable losses, shifting debate from moral grounds to purely tactical considerations. When operations fail, documented compliance with assurance edict parameters provides institutional cover for command decisions. Reliability through systematic martyrdom becomes feature rather than flaw in imperial military doctrine designed to manage galactic-scale conflicts through bureaucratic efficiency. The Munitorum prizes regiments that die on schedule more than units that survive through tactical innovation. Understanding predictable losses simplify logistics, while unpredictable success complicates resource allocation. Death Korps methodology eliminates uncertainty from equations where human life represents the most volatile variable in strategic calculations. The human cost reveals itself through intimate details overlooked by institutional accounting. In Dugout lit by single lumen, Watchmaster Hadrian 77 updates personnel rosters with mechanical precision while his left hand trembles from shell shock. Beside each serial number deletion, he writes coordinates where bodies fell, creating geographic index of expenditure that will never reach families who do not exist. These records serve no administrative function. They represent personal ritual conducted by men conditioned to measure worth through systematic loss. Mask removal occurs only under specific circumstances that illuminate the device's dual function as protection and control mechanism. Filters shattered by shrapnel require immediate replacement or covering removal for field repairs. In these moments, exposed features reveal individual humanity that institutional conditioning works to erase: pale skin marked by pressure lines, eyes watering in contaminated air, facial expressions betraying emotion inappropriate to military efficiency. The mask protects not merely from environmental toxins, but from recognition that each serial number represents unique consciousness systematically reduced to interchangeable component. Medical protocols governing mask breach casualties demonstrate institutional priorities with clinical precision. White Hands Medici apply triage decisions based on equipment condition rather than wound severity. Understanding rebreather apparatus represents more valuable asset than its wearer. Soldiers with damaged masks receive terminal classification regardless of injury type, their remaining utility measured in hours rather than potential service years. The pale thumb traces ash cross on foreheads, marking expenditure authorization rather than blessing. The air itself becomes enemy through institutional design that weaponizes environment against human autonomy. Contaminated atmosphere requires constant filtration, creating dependency relationship between soldier and equipment extending beyond battlefield necessity. Breathing becomes measured activity subject to rationing and administrative control. Soldiers learn to associate unfiltered air with death, creating psychological conditioning that reinforces mask dependency even in safe environments. The captured strong point represents finger-width advance on maps, where tactical progress measures against strategic objectives spanning decades rather than days. Command Vox logs record mission success through administrative language, reducing human sacrifice to logistical notation. Objective secured, men spent, variance within parameters. The mathematics balance according to institutional requirements rather than tactical achievement, treating battlefield success as confirmation of forecasting accuracy rather than military effectiveness. What happens when the air itself becomes the enemy of both body and soul? Does the mask protect the soldier, or protect the institution from the soldier's humanity? The institutional machinery that transforms battlefield victory into statistical compliance operates through environmental weaponization that extends control beyond traditional command structures. Death Korps deployment patterns reveal systematic assignment to contaminated war zones, where atmospheric toxicity serves dual functions: tactical necessity and behavioral conditioning. These environments demonstrate how air itself becomes instrument of institutional authority, creating dependency relationships that reduce human autonomy to filtered breath measured in rationed hours. Phosgene rain falls across contested sectors with molecular precision that etches patterns into exposed surfaces, while penetrating protective equipment through accumulated exposure. Each droplet carries chemical death that burns through fabric and flesh with equal efficiency, creating acid scarring that measures service duration rather than individual experience. Soldiers learn atmospheric recognition through sound against mask lenses. Light precipitation creates gentle percussion, while heavy drops drum with authority, demanding immediate shelter. The chemistry lessons memorized in underground drill scolaire translate into survival reflexes, where weather conditions determine tactical movement more than enemy positions. Spore-choked trenches extend through landscapes, transformed into biological warfare laboratories, where fungal growths carpet firing steps with luminescent patches, providing the only illumination in sectors where artificial light attracts concentrated artillery fire. The organisms penetrate equipment seals through molecular infiltration, requiring hourly filter replacement schedules that consume supplies faster than standard resupply cycles permit. Breathing becomes rationed activity, where each inhalation represents calculated risk against measured necessity. The mathematics of survival reducing human respiration to administrative procedure. Radiation storms sweep across deployment zones with electromagnetic pulses that disrupt Vox communications, while particle bombardment penetrates protective clothing through accumulated exposure that follows predictable degradation curves. Geiger counters attached to rebreather apparatus click with metallic rhythm, providing alternative timekeeper to heartbeat, their acceleration indicating approach to dosage limits, calculated to preserve operational effectiveness rather than long-term health outcomes. Navigation proceeds by radiation gradient, using contamination levels as terrain features in landscapes, where conventional landmarks have been reduced to radioactive glass. Daily survival protocols transform basic human functions into administrative procedures, conducted with sacramental precision. Hourly filter drills require synchronized replacement of breathing apparatus components, according to schedules determined by atmospheric toxicity readings, rather than individual physiological need. Watchmasters pace between crouched figures with stopwatch authority, listening for valve whine indicating proper seal integrity, while noting failures that trigger collective punishment protocols. A trooper who fumbles twice receives equipment redistribution and role reassignment before attempting a third failure. Protective clothing deteriorates according to mathematical patterns, where suit seams fail under chemical stress, allowing toxins to penetrate against skin that develops lesions from prolonged contact with filtered but imperfect protection. Ointment rations calculate healing capacity against exposure rates, creating direct relationship between wound treatment and operational requirements. When penance hours exceed medical supply allocation, skin sloughs under suit edges like shed scales, leaving raw tissue that weeps, clear fluid tasting of metal and antiseptic. Flesh remembers the mask through pressure lines that persist even during brief removal for equipment maintenance. The mask removal taboo operates through peer enforcement, treating atmospheric exposure as doctrinal heresy, requiring immediate intervention. Soldiers police each other with religious intensity. Understanding individual breach threatens group survival through panic cascade effects that compromise unit effectiveness. A two-tone whistle signals contamination event. Personnel within 3 paces freeze, while the breached individual receives ash cross marking and immediate classification for expendable deployment. White Hands Medici respond with protocols treating exposure as both biohazard and spiritual contamination, requiring quarantine procedures that function as death sentences disguised as medical necessity. Survival taxes accumulate through physiological degradation that measures service duration in declining respiratory capacity rather than chronological age. Perpetual hypoxia creates cognitive limitation, reducing complex decision-making ability, while enhancing compliance with simple commands, effectively breeding intellectual dependency that reinforces institutional control. Blood runs brown with accumulated metal particulates, while urine carries heat as if transporting cinders through damaged filtration systems. Chem-lung fibrosis develops predictably by age 40, creating retirement schedules through medical disability rather than pension entitlement. Sleep brings dreams saturated with metallic taste that penetrates unconscious experience, creating psychological conditioning associating rest with contamination rather than recovery. Soldiers wake with copper coating their tongues, the flavor persisting through morning rations that taste identical regardless of official menu descriptions. The voice disappears first, crushed flat by filter mechanisms, until only whispers remain as standard communication method. Bodies adapt according to institutional requirements, then fail according to predetermined schedules that balance human resources against operational demands. Even within this systematic degradation, individual choices surface with stubborn persistence. A watchmaster scores tick marks inside his mask rim for each man sent forward who failed to return, knowing no administrative audit will discover this private accounting system. A sapper oils equipment seals with the same protective balm, applied to facial pressure points, maintaining machinery and flesh through identical ritual procedures. A White Hands medic hums hymns while rinsing gloves in basins that never run clear, melody filtered through rebreather apparatus until only rhythm remains recognizable. The environmental control extends beyond battlefield necessity to encompass comprehensive behavioral modification, where contaminated atmosphere serves as invisible commissar, enforcing compliance through biological dependency. Soldiers cannot rebel against institutional authority while dependent on equipment controlled by administrative systems, determining deployment, supply, and survival protocols. The mask protects not merely from environmental toxins, but from recognition that systematic dehumanization requires constant technological mediation to maintain effectiveness. Under identical masks, 3 different souls, what remains of individual choice. If you were manufactured to die, can you still decide how to live, The environmental control systems that weaponize atmosphere against human autonomy cannot entirely eliminate the stubborn persistence of individual consciousness beneath institutional conditioning. Even within Death Korps ranks, where identity erasure operates with industrial efficiency, personal rituals emerge like contraband smuggled through administrative oversight, revealing humanity that systematic dehumanization works constantly to suppress. These intimate practices demonstrate how soldiers manufactured for expenditure discover methods of asserting individual agency within systems designed to prevent such expression. Watchmaster Hadrian 7. 7 maintains unauthorized records in a leather notebook carried against regulation inside his flak vest. Each page contains names recited before assaults, written in careful script that betrays education received before mask fitting, eliminated facial recognition as meaningful skill. The entries span 17 years of service, documenting soldiers who spoke personal appellations rather than serial numbers in moments preceding probable death. He has not seen unfiltered sunlight since childhood spent in Krieg's underground facilities, yet memory preserves phantom sensation of warmth against skin unprotected by rebreather apparatus. The notebook represents systematic attempt to preserve individual identity through collective memory, recording names that administrative systems reduce to alphanumeric codes processed through casualty reports. Death Rider Corvain 9-4 braids his mount's mane with spent lascasing cartridges, while whispering the litany of distance learned from stable hands who remembered pre-war cavalry traditions. His horse wears fitted mask identical to human equipment, eyes glazed with perpetual moisture from filtered air circulation. The braiding ritual requires precise finger movements despite gloved hands, creating patterns that serve no tactical function while consuming time allocated for equipment maintenance. Each cartridge represents engagement survived, memorial to battles measured in meters gained rather than strategic objectives achieved. The litany consists of fragmentary verses describing landscapes beyond contaminated deployment zones, places where horses might run without respiratory protection through grass unmarked by chemical scarring. Whitehand's Medic Valen 2-8 practices mercy through systematic inaction that transforms triage protocols into instruments of compassion disguised as clinical necessity. When his friend arrives with mask breach injuries requiring immediate attention, medical assessment reveals complications requiring extended treatment that would compromise unit operational efficiency. Standard protocol demands terminal classification and comfort measures until expendable deployment eliminates resource drain. The decision represents betrayal of friendship conducted through institutional authority, using medical protocols to provide dignified death rather than prolonged suffering. Personal affection expresses itself through professional distance, friendship preserved by refusing extraordinary measures that would delay inevitable outcome. Coping rituals proliferate despite surveillance systems monitoring behavioral deviation from approved patterns. Soldiers scratch fingernails against inner mask surfaces, creating personal identification marks invisible to external observation, while providing tactile reminder of individual agency. Bone tags receive polishing until serial numbers blur, the repetitive motion serving meditative function while gradually erasing administrative identification. Boot soles conceal fragments of pre-war hymns written on paper scraps, words memorized through repetition that connects present service to cultural memory predating institutional conditioning. Someone has preserved a melody fragment that tastes of home when hummed through filter apparatus, though home exists only as theoretical concept rather than experienced reality. Confessional scenes occur in sealed chambers, where atmospheric isolation permits mask removal for maintenance procedures that provide opportunity for unauthorized communication. Trooper Garrett 4-5 removes protective equipment in presence of Watchmaster while admitting fear that violates doctrinal requirements for absolute faith in Imperial purpose. His face, pale and marked by permanent pressure lines, reveals vulnerability that mask normally conceals. The confession exposes human emotion persisting beneath conditioning designed to eliminate such responses, creating administrative problem requiring institutional solution through additional programming rather than disciplinary action. Penance assignment follows predetermined protocols. Volunteer sapper duty, where psychological deviation receives correction through increased exposure to environmental hazards and elevated casualty probability. The punishment operates through mathematical precision rather than moral judgment, using statistical likelihood to address behavioral aberration through systematic application of doctrine to individual case. Fear receives treatment through probable death, the cure matching symptom through institutional logic that reduces human complexity to administrative categories. These intimate vignettes reveal how triage protocols and mask taboos function as personal betrayals rather than abstract policies, demonstrating institutional efficiency, operating through systematic violation of human relationships. The medic who abandons friends follows training that prioritizes collective survival over individual loyalty. The mask removal that triggers punishment protocols transforms necessary maintenance into doctrinal violation, requiring correction through expendable deployment. Yet within these betrayals, humanity persists through small gestures that institutional mathematics cannot entirely quantify or eliminate. Do allied regiments see heroes, or tools that make everyone else expendable? When doctrine collides with strategy, who yields first? The intimate betrayals revealed through personal vignettes extend beyond individual experience to encompass institutional contradictions that expose Death Korps methodology as systematically counterproductive to military effectiveness. These case studies demonstrate how bureaucratic preference for predictable outcomes damages strategic objectives, while administrative narratives reframe tactical inefficiency as spiritual virtue, creating moral inversions that transform systematic failure into doctrinal success. On the Kaurava siege front, Allied Cadian light infantry proposed infiltration tactics through a collapsed ravine system that reconnaissance had identified as lightly defended. 3 listening posts, slow sentry cycles, and a culvert destroyed by previous bombardment created opportunity for platoon-strength penetration that could open sally gates from rear approaches. The same strong point that Death Korps grenadiers had reduced through frontal assault could be taken quietly, efficiently, with minimal casualties. Command denied the request. The assurance edict required zeal, and zeal operated according to predetermined brackets that infiltration tactics could not satisfy. At dawn, the Death Korps executed approved methodology: trench ladders, preparatory barrage, wire-cutting charges, satchel demolitions, bayonet work conducted with liturgical precision. The objective fell by noon through systematic application of doctrine learned in underground drill scholae. The cost tripled Allied estimates while achieving identical tactical results. Sector Command praised textbook devotion, forwarded variance sheets stamped within acceptable parameters to Munitorum liaison offices. The Cadian captain watched smoke settle into crater where bunker had stood and transmitted the only message his data slate would preserve. We could have walked in. Colonel Jurgen of the Armageddon Steel Legion, speaking through encrypted channels during joint operations, provided blunt assessment that captured widespread sentiment among Allied commanders. Guaranteed losses in human form, he whispered, staring at ash coating his gloves. The phrase carried no insult, only recognition of institutional utility that simplified tactical planning through reliable casualty absorption. When sectors required units willing to draw enemy fire, while competent regiments maneuvered for actual victory, Death Korps provided mathematical certainty. Everyone else could plan around the gap their systematic self-destruction would create. Off-world Commissar Malthorn arrived expecting traditional disciplinary challenges requiring bolt pistol enforcement and inspirational rhetoric to maintain unit cohesion under combat stress. Instead, he discovered regimental structure where summary execution served no functional purpose, because cowardice could not manifest among soldiers, conditioned to interpret survival as potential spiritual failure. His tactical counsel received polite acknowledgement, followed by systematic dismissal. When he proposed smoke screens and diversionary tactics over second frontal assault, watchmasters listened in silence and waited for next timing mark. The plan remained unchanged because Voriant's corrupted ledger mathematics, Malthorn wrapped his bolt pistol in oilcloth like ceremonial relic and filed reports documenting compliance rather than leadership. The Departamento Munitorum preference for predictable depletion creates systematic bias, favoring regiments that die on schedule over units achieving objectives through tactical innovation. When corps commanders know Death Korps regiments will accept 40% losses and still assault at H+60 minutes, strategic plans calcify around that certainty. Schedules harden, alternatives collapse, logistics writes doctrine in negative space left by imagination. Quartermaster assessments evaluate regimental performance partly through casualty compliance with projected brackets, treating variance as administrative failure regardless of mission success. The enemy adapts to predictable rhythm, yet that rhythm comforts administrators whose success measures absence of surprise rather than presence of victory. Case files from subsequent operations reveal systematic cost of institutional rigidity. When weather grounded artillery support for 30 hours, Allied light infantry received permission to execute ravine infiltration. They severed communication lines, opened fortress gates, and secured positions with 8 wounded total. The following morning, Munitorum Liaison issued administrative reprimand. Casualties fell below proof of zeal requirements. Replacement flows and ration allotments for their brigade shifted downward to realign projections with mathematical models. Success created punishment because it broke institutional mathematics that demanded predictable human expenditure. Ecclesiarchy narratives provide theological framework justifying tactical inefficiency through spiritual interpretation that transforms systematic failure into doctrinal virtue. Chapel dugouts host sermons, converting expenditure into sacrament. Every drop of blood becomes tithe payment. Every advance through wire represents devotional station. Every mask functions as pilgrim's cowl. Hope receives redefinition as endurance rather than change, promising not that soldiers will survive, but that deaths will receive proper categorization, witnessing, and remembrance by emperor and administrative ledger. Men leave services with lungs damaged by filtered toxins, and stamped authorization chits affirming their statistical value to institutional machinery. The moral inversion operates through systematic redefinition of hope as coping mechanism smoothing logistical processes rather than genuine salvation. Watchmasters tell sections redemption approaches because tactical pins advance on planning maps. Chaplains assure sappers their chemical burns represent incense offerings. Troopers polish bone tags until serial numbers blur. Believing eroded identification means exemption from next casualty sheet. These mercies lack transformative power, shaped to fit administrative gears they oil, maintaining human movement toward wire obstacles while preventing recognition of systematic dehumanization. When Institutional Council convened to address tactical contradictions, Steel Legion officers argued for blending methodologies, infiltration to unhinge defensive lines, followed by staircase of fire upon reserves. The proposal died in committee review. Quartermaster representatives preferred single method executed with mathematical precision over multiple approaches executed competently. Perfect in administrative usage meant repeatable. Innovation threatened statistical models requiring predictable outcomes for resource allocation and replacement scheduling. The Commissar's advisory note suggesting tactical flexibility might reduce casualties was received, filed, and forgotten. Command structures adapt to accommodate Death Korps methodology through tactical modifications, incorporating systematic inefficiency as operational assumption rather than correctable problem. Allied units receive deployment patterns, accounting for Death Korps casualty rates, using their predictable losses as tactical resources, enabling sophisticated maneuvers by competent regiments. This approach treats human sacrifice as strategic asset, measuring Death Korps' value through enemy resources consumed rather than objectives achieved independently. The institutional contradictions reveal systematic preference for administrative convenience over military effectiveness, demonstrating how bureaucratic requirements shape tactical doctrine according to logistical considerations rather than strategic necessity. Death Korps' methodology succeeds not through military competence, but through bureaucratic compliance, providing institutional cover for command failures while consuming resources that might otherwise enable genuine tactical innovation. Do Allied regiments see heroes or tools that make everyone else expendable? When doctrine collides with strategy, who yields first? The institutional contradictions exposed through battlefield analysis trace their origins to the source facilities where systematic dehumanization operates as manufacturing process rather than military doctrine. To understand why Death Korps methodologies persists despite tactical inefficiency, we must return to Krieg's subterranean infrastructure, where human production continues according to schedules determined by administrative requirements rather than strategic objectives. Here, beneath ash-choked surface, foundries of guilt convert planetary trauma into renewable resource through systematic application of industrial principles to human development. Subterranean manufactoria extend through cathedral-sized chambers, lit by lumens arranged with shrine-chapel solemnity, their artificial radiance providing the only illumination most inhabitants experience throughout abbreviated lifespans. Production lines stretch between rows of specialized equipment, where technicians in ceremonial robes operate machinery, processing genetic material according to predetermined specifications. The facilities function as hybrid installations, combining sacred architecture with industrial efficiency, their dual nature reflecting institutional fusion of ecclesiarchy doctrine with munitorum production requirements. Servo skulls drift through assembly areas chanting efficiency litanies, while incense burns at wall niches where soot-blackened icons of the Emperor wear rebreathers carved into divine features. Creche vaults occupy entire sublevels where thousands of infants undergo conditioning protocols designed to establish rebreather dependency before speech development enables questioning of environmental necessity. Tiny masks fitted over faces barely larger than adult fists create artificial selection pressure, favoring respiratory adaptation while eliminating specimens displaying excessive independence or curiosity. Technicians monitor biometric data streams, recording heart rate, oxygen absorption, and behavioral responses to stimuli, their observations feeding algorithms determining individual assignment to specialized development tracks. Children learn mask maintenance before walking, filter replacement before speech, serial number recognition before personal names. Their first words emerge through mechanical filtration that flattens vocal patterns into standardized communication protocols. Gene laboratories accelerate childhood development through chemical intervention that compresses natural maturation into schedules aligned with production quotas rather than biological optimization. Growth hormones administered through rationed nutrition create physical development patterns, while psychological conditioning eliminates emotional complexity that might compromise unit cohesion. Technicians wearing sealed suits move between specimen containers with ritualistic efficiency, checking genetic markers against predetermined templates that reduce human potential to alphanumeric codes stamped on identification tags. Deviations receive flagging, review, and removal without ceremony. Official catechism blames radiation bottlenecking for uniformity, but the corridors reveal otherwise through lot numbers, growth acceleration schedules, and batch-to-regiment assignment tables. Sterility receives normalization through institutional design that eliminates concepts of family, home, or personal attachment from developmental experience. Children progress through numbered dormitories according to growth metrics and behavioral assessments, their movements tracked through biometric scanning that treats individual identity as administrative category subject to revision. Social interaction occurs only within approved parameters designed to foster squad cohesion while preventing personal bonds that might compromise tactical effectiveness. Family becomes redefined as squad structure, love as tactical concept measured through willingness to accept collective punishment for individual failures. Ecclesiarchy rites maintain open wounds through ceremonial observances that prevent healing of foundational trauma underlying institutional purpose. Daily services begin with recitation of planetary sins, requiring perpetual expiation through military service, their liturgical language embedding guilt into muscle memory through repetitive conditioning. Children learn to associate breathing with debt payment, existence with obligation, survival with spiritual failure requiring correction through systematic expenditure. Chapel chambers host blessing ceremonies, where newborns receive mask fitting as sacramental initiation into lifelong penance. Preachers move through manufactoria, delivering sermons that echo over machinery din, reminding workers that every rivet hammered, every circuit soldered, every ration synthesized represents acts of penance contributing to endless ledger of redemption. Forge quotas sustain production rhythms through mathematical precision, treating human manufacturing as industrial process subject to efficiency, optimization, and quality control measures. Monthly output targets specify numbers of completed specimens allocated to various military specializations, their distribution calculated according to projected casualty rates and replacement schedules. When quotas fall short, overtime shifts extend conditioning protocols, while accelerated development programs compress maturation timelines. The tithe clock governs all schedules with mathematical authority, understanding that every 180 days transport convoys must lift carrying fresh regiments to fulfill imperial obligations. The Reconciliation Horizon Memorandum receives periodic review through classified assessment committees, updating actuarial projections, determining when planetary debt might achieve theoretical balance. Mathematical models examine population growth rates, recruitment quotas, casualty statistics, and strategic value assessments, while incorporating variables accounting for galactic conflict duration and imperial resource requirements. Each analysis reaches identical conclusion expressed through bureaucratic language. No terminus date can be calculated, because debt structure requires perpetual motion to maintain institutional stability. The ledger never balances by design, creating self-sustaining cycle where guilt fuels production, production enables expenditure, and expenditure justifies continued guilt. This revelation provides definitive answer to questions raised throughout the investigation. Death Korps soldiers are neither born nor trained in conventional sense. They are assembled according to industrial specifications that reduce human development to manufacturing process, optimized for specific outcomes. Human lives are designed to fill ledger gaps with actuarial precision, their existence calculated to balance institutional equations rather than achieve strategic objectives. Educational facilities demonstrate this industrial approach through curriculum focusing exclusively on death preparation, while eliminating knowledge, fostering independent thinking. In Vault 9, a teacher wearing standard rebreather guides children through funeral rite rehearsals, using miniature coffins and bone tag presses. Students practice arranging bodies for reclamation servitors, reciting final litanies for masks, preparing identification tags for scanning. She observes performance with clinical attention, her voice carrying maternal warmth filtered through institutional authority. Rehearsal is kindness. Practice prevents panic. When your time comes, you will know exactly what to do. The smile represents systematic inversion of parental care into preparation for systematic expenditure, transforming protective instincts into instruments of institutional efficiency. If the ledger never balances, what purpose does the counting serve? What does good death mean when the machine runs on systematic dying? The foundries of guilt reveal the complete circuit that transforms planetary trauma into renewable military resource through systematic application of industrial principles to human consciousness. This investigation has traced the arc from atomic immolation through institutional conditioning to battlefield expenditure, demonstrating how civilization can metabolize catastrophe into perpetual motion machine, where guilt fuels production, production enables expenditure, and expenditure justifies continued guilt. The Death Korps represent not military aberration, but administrative perfection, doctrine refined until human life becomes currency in transactions with institutional mathematics. The synthesis emerges through institutional archaeology, revealing how trauma becomes doctrine through bureaucratic mediation. Krieg's atomic fire created foundational wound, but the debt represents administrative creation rather than historical obligation. The Departamento Munitorum and Ecclesiarchy collaborated to transform survival guilt into productive asset, establishing frameworks where planetary shame generates regimental output according to predetermined schedules. Doctrine forged in radioactive ash hardened into catechism, treating systematic dying as spiritual necessity, each death representing payment toward ledger designed never to balance. Who benefits from engineered fanaticism? The Departamento Munitorum requires predictable casualty rates to simplify logistical planning across galactic-scale conflicts. Quartermaster Corps can calculate replacement schedules with actuarial precision when regiments die according to mathematical certainty. Administrative efficiency supersedes tactical innovation because bureaucratic survival depends on reliable outcomes rather than optimal results. The ledger is not measure but motor, converting dread into tasks, tasks into hours, hours into shipments that arrive on schedule and disappear on cue. What debt was owed that could justify systematic suicide spanning centuries? The sin was harboring traitors, but institutions living on penance immortalized guilt through theological frameworks requiring perpetual bloodletting for healing. The Reconciliation Horizon Memorandum confirms debt structure designed without terminus, understanding that balance would eliminate justification for continued human manufacturing. Forgiveness would break the machine by idling manufactoria, silencing chapels, cancelling shipments. Penance became policy, because policy generates payroll. Why does counting never end despite systematic expenditure measured in statistical brackets? The arithmetic sustains motion through perpetual calculations that justify institutional existence rather than achieving redemptive conclusion. Mathematical models incorporate variables, ensuring projections never resolve, creating self-sustaining cycle where administrative necessity supersedes theological purpose. The counting oils consent by converting systematic dehumanization into manageable procedures, giving the dying grammar for their expenditure. Tactics transform bodies into mathematics through siege warfare principles, prioritizing predictable outcomes over tactical effectiveness. The staircase of fire operates as both artillery pattern and prayer sequence, converting battlefield deaths into spiritual currency, while providing administrative cover for command decisions. Masks preserve machines more than men, functioning as instruments of identity erasure that reduce individual consciousness to interchangeable components, while preventing panic cascades that might compromise operational efficiency. The investigation closes all loops through definitive understanding, of institutional logic operating through systematic conversion of human potential into administrative certainty. In command dugouts chalked with humidity and dust, the voice that tallies zeal belongs not to gods or heroes, but to clerks with styluses, initials stamped at variant sheet bottoms, objective secured, men spent. The phrase travels faster than breath and leaves less trace. We return to the opening image with deeper comprehension of its significance. In the creche vault beneath Krieg's ash-choked surface, the child lifts bone tag press with practiced precision. Her movement contains single-digit error in serial sequence. 7 becomes 1. A transposed number that will propagate through administrative systems without detection. The variance represents individual agency expressed through systematic mistake, human consciousness asserting itself against institutional machinery designed to eliminate such expression. The system processes volume rather than accuracy. Understanding statistical compliance matters more than perfect precision. Still, under identical masks, stubborn signals persist, measured in millimeters too small for staff maps and too human to survive audit. A watchmaster writes names no ledger accepts. A death rider braids brass into mane that will not survive the next barrage. A medic hums tune that failed quality control. These resistances change not outcomes, but how men meet them. Humanity persisting within systems designed to eliminate individual identity through systematic conditioning. This investigation concludes with procedural creed functioning as both practical instruction and spiritual catechism, spoken not to preserve life, but to ensure death occurs according to approved protocols. The words echo through filtered air across deployment zones, where soldiers manufactured for expenditure prepare for systematic application of doctrine to landscape. Check the seal, count the rounds, memorize the pattern, spend yourself, be tallied. The mask breathes with mechanical rhythm, marking time in buried world. The tally clicks with mathematical precision, recording expenditure against endless debt. The ash falls like contaminated snow through cracked ventilation, carrying molecular memory of atomic verdict that transformed world into penance factory operating through perpetual motion, and the counting continues without terminus because the ledger was designed never to balance.